Welcome back to my not tutorial of building the Skeeride 2. This is a Ski Doo that I'm putting together. If you remember, we finished the frame, or I finished the frame last time. So now we're going to go ahead and work on the suspension. In the bag of the Traxxas 5525 rod ends, you'll notice that some of them have a different ball insert. This one is a little bit longer and has a big flared end than this one. So what I like to do, or what I want to show you, is the longer one won't fit in this spindle. So that one's going to be used on the upper A-arm on top of the spindle. The smaller insert is going to go right here, and it's going to fit perfectly in there. So just make sure that you have at least one of the smaller ones to fit on the inside part of the spindle. They can also work on the top. And then I like to make sure that that flared end is what gets put up against the spindle. Now in the instruction manual, it says to use threaded rod for these. I have found personally, I would rather use a smooth stainless steel rod. So that's what I do. They're still the same length, 54 millimeters on the short one, 74 millimeters on the longer one. So I'm going to take my drill. Going to open those holes up. So here I have an extra long 3 millimeter bit. I'm going to open up these holes where these shafts will go. You want to be careful down here because you can punch through those and go on the other side of the motor. I typically try to screw these holes before I install the motor because I have popped through these holes before. And when you do, or if you do, then you can just use a little bit of hot glue on the back end. So we'll go with a 3 millimeter right here. Get something to push on that. It's probably a good idea. It's pretty stable, pretty firm. I'm gonna open that up and get the teeth on there. And you can see they move. I don't want it to be too loose because I have had some when I've built them before that they pivot a little bit. So I don't want to open those holes too much. You can see the bottom ones look like they're even just a little bit looser. Fantastic. Yeah, it's going to be great. You know what, I was excited to build this, and you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to slide, oh shoot, I forgot to slide the rod ends into here. So now what I'm gonna have to do is, if you remember, I want the bigger ball end to be on the top, so it slides in right there. And then now what I'll have to do is take a ball end hex tool to screw my screw in, which is an M4 by 16 that goes in here and goes in the bottom. Shoot. I was too excited to get those on the frame. So don't do what I did. So once I have the head of those 16 millimeter screws just beyond the plastic right here that it sits fairly flush, that's where I want them to be. There we go. And then I'm not going to snug them too tight because I'm going to install the spindles first. I might need to rotate these rod ends a little bit. So I've got my 2.5 millimeter drill bit just to clean up these holes where the M3 by 40 screw is going to go. So now what I will do is take my lower A-arm rod end, and you'll see here, this needs to be rotated just a little bit. One side right there. looking great. Here we go. We've got our spindles, our A-arms. So I've already put one of the ball ends in my rack. So now I'm going to slide the other one in. Right on. And I am going to use M3 by 14 button head screws to hold those in. So with the straight rod ends installed on the steering rack, I can now take the angle rod ends and the M3 rod and install them for our steering links. So what you want to do is to make sure that your M3 rod goes between your A-arms. This is just under 85 millimeters. It's about 84.8. So I'm going to come right here and then just start screwing it in. And then I can take the angled rod end and just spin it onto there. And I will do the same thing on the other side. I'm just going to use some 12 millimeter screws. It goes through about halfway of the spindle. And right now I'm just doing this so that these spindles aren't flopping all over the place. And so that I can adjust for the toe in, toe out, etc. So there they are. And then what I like to do is to get the shocks installed, and then we'll get the skis installed so that we can see what the toe in and toe out looks like. So the shocks I'm using are from Amazon. These are 90 millimeter piggyback shocks. I did add 40 weight oil to them, and it did dampen them a little bit. They're super inexpensive, but I find that they work great. For the upper shock mount, I'm using an M3 by 18 screw. For the lower shock mounts, I'm going to do a 20 millimeter screw. You could go a little bit longer, but I find that the 20 millimeter bites into the back side of the A-arm enough. And if you have to take your shocks off for some reason and you need it to bite a little bit more, then you can go up to a 25. With the shocks installed, I'm now going to put the skis on, and you'll notice here that I have sanded down a little bit on these spindles. I think it's because my flow is a little high. So something I've noticed with the MKC float skis, they're the Ski Doo width, is that it's a little too wide to fit into the channel. So here's that MKC float ski, and I've just taken it was a Dremel with a little sanding bit, and I sanded a little bit here, a little bit there, and then I sanded a little bit on the inside as well. However, I was visiting with the designer, MKC, of the arms, the spindles, and these skis, and his suggestion was to print the skis a little bit wider, or even print the spindles a little bit smaller. So the next time I do this, because I've always just sanded them down, I didn't even think of that, I'm going to print them at 101% width, I think, rather than scaling down the spindles. Now, when you print these skis, they have a logo on the side, MKC Pro, and you want to print one of them like this and the other one like this, so that you have a nice clean logo. I like to put this logo on the outside and then the side that had the supports isn't quite as clean. So when you print these skis, if you orient them like this, you'll get a bunch of jaggies right here. So you want to print them like this on your bed. So I will now install the carbides on the skis, and we will just run that through here. And I have prepared these holes beforehand. Remember, if you're running an M3 screw into it and you want it to hold, you want to use a 2.5-inch drill bit. If you're running it through a hole and you want the screw to just go through the hole, then use a 3mm drill bit. So what I've done is I have run a 2.5mm bit through the sides of this channel. And then on the spindles, I did a 3mm bit through both of the spindles so that the skis will move easier. To attach the skis to the spindles, I've got M3 by 25mm screws. Here we go. Now you can see it's a little tight, so I can back this off. There we go, and that'll loosen up with time. Now, if you look here at my toe out, it's a little bit too much. And as I compress the suspension, you'll see that it really does straighten up. But that is why I didn't put Loctite, blue thread lock, on the threaded rod here with these rod ends, because I like to see what adjustments need to be made. So with this, I'm going to unscrew. There we go. And then I'm gonna do, let's see, loosen it one thread that way. So I just loosened it from this inner rod end. It's a lot shorter than the angled one. So now I'm loosening the angled one to see about where that puts it. Let's do another half on the inner and then another 2 on the outer angled one. That looks a lot better right there. Put our screw back in. And you can see pretty big difference now between this ski and this ski. And I would say that is probably about how much toe out I would want. Now I will loosen this, remember this inner one, so I'm holding on to the rod and I'm extending, I'm loosening it out of that inner rod. I just did about 2 turns, and then on this bottom one I'm going to do about 3. And as I look right there, I think I'm going to want a little more, so I'm going to screw that in and then go right here. Let's see how that looks. And you can see as I fully compress the shocks, I get a little bit of toe in. So like I said, I'm just going to put a little dab. There we go, right in there. Then I'm going to hold on or pinch this threaded rod, and I'm going to go 2 whole turns. So I'm going to go 1, 2, and allow that thread lock to go into there, and then I'm going to spin it back. 1, 2. Like I said, I don't need much. M3 16mm. And because I've got some threads in that hole, I'm going to go left, there we go, until the threads want to grab. And then I can keep screwing in that 16mm screw all the way through the spindle. So I've put a little dab of thread lock right there. Thread this in if you want to a little bit, now that they're where they're supposed to be. And then now I can go do the same thing on the other side. So we'll do again. And then remember, I'm gonna hold that right there. I'm gonna loosen this. 1, 2, whole turns, and then go back 1, and then 2. Gonna go left to catch my threads. Just a little bit. Kind of like what Bob Ross would say, just a little bit. Get some happy blue thread lock in there. Awesome. I am happy with that. So the last thing to do is install my ski hook onto my ski. And it really doesn't matter the order you did this. I actually needed to reprint my ski hooks. I used to print them like this, but I tried to print them standing like this on the print bed. And because the layer lines are going this way, it ended up splitting, and you can see it split pretty easily. So I ended up going back to the way I printed, which I don't love because you get where the support is, it's just not as clean looking on the sides compared to this one. Underneath is where the supports are, but as you can see, it's just not as strong. This is the other one that had the layer lines there, and yeah, you can see you just barely bend it and it just snaps. So I ended up printing these down like this. So now what I'll do is slide that over the ski and then just push it in right here. And I was having a little bit of the issue where this was kind of tight, so I think in the future I would print these skis at maybe like 95.5% wide, so that it ended up being a little bit easier to slide it in. And then I'm going to take my 2.5-inch drill bit,